want to talk about cyber resilience, essentially how NetApp is addressing the challenges of data protection and data security. Now, it shouldn't be a surprise to any of you that one of the key stresses of executives is cyber threats. According to Allianz, published this year, it's the #1 problem keeping executives awake at night. And the top 2 challenges are ransomware and data breaches. And there's a good reason why. I mean, these are really expensive problems to solve. According to Sophos, the average cost to remediate a ransomware attack is over $1.8 million. And that was up over the prior year of about $780,000. So the cost to remediate these challenges is really high. In fact, in most cases, it's about 10 times the cost of a ransom that's being requested. Now, based upon some primary research that we've done that we'll be publishing in the coming weeks, we've found that most customers or most organizations are using backup and recovery as the primary tool to protect and recover against ransomware attacks. And that's followed closely by user behavior analytics. Now, according to this research here from Veeam published last year, I found it interesting that 1/3 of backups and 1/3 of restores fail. That was pretty high. I wasn't expecting that number. But what that means is that if we're relying on backup and recovery as our primary protection, then we need a better solution than having 2/3 of them actually succeeding. Now, what are hackers looking for, right? They're after data, right? They want to steal it, they want to encrypt it, they want to delete it, they want to do whatever they can to limit the use of data in order to extort money to get that data back. But sadly, only about 8% of data that actually tries to recover from ransomware attacks, even with a key, is fully successful. So it's really kind of risky, and whether even if you pay a ransom, whether you're going to get all of your data back. Now, we look at data protection and security as kind of a data-centric approach to this. And I like to think about it in terms of like the automotive sector. So I spent 5 years in the automotive business. And when you think about safety and security technologies in cars, they're really focused around the occupant, the passenger, right? They're the most important asset that's inside of that vehicle. Things like airbags and seat belts and side impact beams and even analog brakes and blind spot detection. All of these technologies are designed to protect the occupant or passenger or occupants outside in other cars or walking across crosswalks and things like that. And we look at it in the same way, that data is the most important asset within an organization. And so we take this data-centric approach to protecting and security, using zero trust as our design principle. So looking from the inside out, starting with the data and then moving out. Now, you may be saying that NetApp's not really a security company, and traditionally, that's true. We're not in the traditional sense a data security company or a security company in general. But I like to think of Lee Corso, right, with the not so fast, my friend, when he's on college game day on Saturday mornings. We are actually quite experts in data security, especially as it sits on the storage and on the disk that we sell. In fact, we're the only enterprise storage company that's been validated for top secret data, and that's proven by this top one here, commercial solutions for classified component lists. This is fairly new, but NetApp is the only enterprise storage vendor listed and validated to store data for the NSA. Followed by additional certifications with the Department of Defense and common criteria. But data security is only a portion of this cybersecurity, cyber threat conversation. Data protection is also part of that. And as I mentioned earlier, that most users are relying on backup and recovery to deal with ransomware and cybersecurity threats. Now, NetApp makes it easy for our customers. We've built in snapshot-based technology for decades into our products. And those technologies are used to rapidly create copies of data for the use of recovery. All for One Group is an IT consultant firm in Germany, and they take 5,000 copies a day, each one lasting about 23 seconds. Now that dramatically removes the obstacle of backups, especially the backup time that's required or backup windows that most organizations have. It also means that they can take backups much more frequently, reducing the recovery point by which they recover their data. Now, within our integrated data protection, we also retain the data efficiencies of the primary storage as it moves to secondary storage for secondary copies. And that means dramatic cost reductions. In this particular case, Cone Health migrated their data protection to Azure for disaster recovery. And in that process of using NetApp technology, they've discovered that they achieve about $1 million worth of annual savings. And then finally, what's a backup if it's not for recovery? In this particular case, Be the Match, they're a bone marrow matching service. And they use NetApp technology, and they've been able to reduce the recovery time from multiple hours to under 15 minutes. And effectively, that essentially keeps them uptime 24/7 without the worry of having to have a lot of downtime, which is the predominant cost associated with remediating ransomware attacks. So as I mentioned, NetApp is looking at data protection and data security from a holistic approach. We call this cyber resilience. And so we're protecting against things like natural disasters, human error, accidental data loss, but also cyber threats like ransomware, even data governance and compliance issues. We bucket into this cyber resilience story. And what's unique about what NetApp does is that we're not just focused on the secondary storage. Most of the conversation around ransomware today and cybersecurity is on the secondary storage. At least most of the vendors out there, the backup vendors, are traditionally focused on being able to recover once an incident has already happened. And I joke about this a little bit. I don't know if it's very funny, but I thought it was kind of funny, which is we're trying to keep the wolves from getting into the hen house. Others are trying to take the chickens out of the wolf's mouth. And so if NetApp is focusing not only on the secondary storage, but also on primary and delivering technologies that enable the prevention and not only the recovery of data. So let's look at what our portfolio is. So our portfolio consists of multiple layers. And if you think about your own home, or you think about your car, or maybe even a museum, there's going to be multiple layers of protection and security that are required to address the various attack vectors that Darnell talked about earlier. The foundation of this is built on NetApp ONTAP. And ONTAP can be delivered as engineered systems in a data center. It can be delivered as software-defined storage, either in the data center or in the public cloud. Chuck talked a little bit about cloud volumes on tap. It can also be delivered as a fully managed service. FSX for NetApp ONTAP is an example. Azure NetApp Files is another example. Fully managed services delivered, deployed, purchased, and supported through a hyperscaler. We build off that and then add on to it the ability to back up data efficiently using native technologies that effectively move data using block-based movement and retaining the data efficiencies to either another ONTAP device or to an object storage. On top of that, we have data discovery and classification technologies. In this particular case, Cloud Data Sense allows us to look across all data repositories, whether they be in the cloud, on-prem, NetApp storage, non-NetApp storage, file, object, or even databases to discover who has access, what type of data is it, who has permissions, and is it sensitive data and where it's located. And finally, we have the ability to look across the infrastructure to see the performance of the infrastructure, to see who has access, what types of user behavior are we monitoring, to see if there's any potential threats. All of this is managed through this global management plane, which Chuck has discussed and given us a demo for. Now, what I'd like to do is walk through the capabilities that we offer. You'll see in this slide here, we have the NIST cybersecurity framework here of identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. We've simplified it to protect, detect, and recover. We're seeing that common in the market right now. And actually, Phoebe and I were talking about this earlier this morning about what would be kind of an analogous conversation that we'd have, and it might be around like a museum. You're going to protect the jewels, you're going to protect the paintings, and what is it that you're planning to do? Well, if I were in charge of security, I'd want to know what things I have, right? What's the most valuable? What's the least valuable? I'll put my most valuable in certain rooms. I'll only have certain access to those things that are most valuable. I'll have different types of security that I'll apply to it. I'll be able to detect the intruders that are trying to steal that. I'll be able to respond by locking gates or whatever the Mission Impossible films will show us as the latest technology for protecting against theft. And then I'll want to understand what went wrong if someone did steal something, be able to do some forensics, and then be able to get us back in place where we can now take in customers again into that museum. And so NetApp offers these technologies as it relates to the data. So first of all, it's important to understand what kind of data I have. Where is it located? Who has access to it? Is it sensitive data? Am I going to back up social security numbers or credit cards? I don't want to do that. So I need to know what kind of data I have before I start applying permission or protection technologies against that. I also want to look at my cloud hygiene and understand what the infrastructure looks like and is it secure. I then move into this protection side of it, right? So I want to have efficient copy management. With NetApp, we can take immutable snapshot copies of our data. They're read-only. They can't be changed, but they can be deleted. And because they can be deleted, we have other technologies. SnapLock, which is a feature built into ONTAP, allows us to apply worm file locking to prevent the deletion and manipulation of data. We also offer efficient movement of the data through SnapMirror, which is another embedded feature of NetApp ONTAP, which uses block-based replication to efficiently move data between endpoints. We also apply malicious file blocking. Malicious file blocking, F-policy is a feature within ONTAP, and ONTAP includes a database of known malicious file extensions. And so before data is even written to the primary storage, we're already comparing that against our database of known bad file extensions to block them from coming to disk. And then we've just added a new feature just last month, 9.11.1 of ONTAP, which is to address insider threat prevention. What we do is that instead of a single admin account being able to perform certain critical tasks like deleting of snapshots, creating of volumes, or even creating user accounts, we require more than one admin account to be able to do that. And so this prevents the possibility of a rogue admin going in and causing a bunch of havoc within the data storage. It also prevents the possibility of compromised credentials of an admin account. I read recently in the Wall Street Journal about a company that had a ransomware event, and it turns out that the vulnerability was an admin account that had a password that hadn't been changed for 8 years. So imagine being able to have the ability to block just a single admin from coming in and deleting data and causing havoc. That's what this multi-admin verify feature within ONTAP provides.
It sounds pretty sweet. Is the idea that then two admins need to log in the same time, like in the old movies, the two keys to launch the missiles? Is that?
It's funny you mentioned that because I had a slide that showed the two keys and I took that out. So an admin can perform a number of functions, but there's a preset number of functions that are critical to behavior that we require. And it's really up to the organization to be able to set that up. But once that's set up, then it requires multiple admins to perform these key functions, including the creation of admin accounts. Because that came up the other day. Someone was saying, well, couldn't an admin create another admin account and then control that?
Right.
But there's a fence for that as well. To create an additional account, two admin accounts have to be able to prove that.
Okay. Cool.
Thank you for the question. We now get into detection. With ONTAP, we can alert to a number of different anomalies within the storage. Things like snapshot reserve space that's increasing, the loss of efficiency, these things which might be indicative of encrypted data, which cannot be deduplicated or compressed. We also look at on-box ransomware detection. This is a new feature that we added last fall. And what ONTAP does is it starts to look at the file system, and we apply machine learning so that it can discover how the file system operates over a period of time. And then as we take it into active mode, then ONTAP automatically looks at data entropy across that file system to determine whether there is a potential threat. And then it immediately kicks off a snapshot as a recovery point, and then alerts the users that there's a potential problem. I'm actually going to demonstrate a little bit about that in a demo. And then finally, we have integration with antivirus software companies through vScan.
So you're obviously protecting the data, and machine learning hopefully detects all malicious attempts or ransomware presence, and it has its own ways. So for example, it detects something. Does it act in the way to say, it's not just a snapshot and says, okay, ransomware probably didn't exist back then? Because part of the reason is when you detect ransomware, then you don't know how far back to go before everything is clean. So that's one thing. And the other is, are you doing something to, in the meantime, prevent data exfiltration in the meantime so that you don't lose anything if there is ransomware and data being extracted out?
Yeah, that's a great question. In fact, the next green topic here on user behavior analytics is a part of that answer. But let me answer the first one, which is the on-box ransomware detection. So we typically have about a 30-day learning cycle for ONTAP to see what normal file system behavior is. And then from that point, when you turn on the active mode, it'll start comparing it against that 30-day window. If it's longer than that, obviously it's not going to be detecting whether a ransomware file was written, but it is going to start looking at the anomalous behavior and whether ransomware is actually taking effect. As it relates to the second question you had around user behavior analytics, so Cloud Insights has a feature within it called Cloud Secure, and it looks at the user access of the storage. So while the ONTAP is looking across the total file system, it might look for things like slow-moving encryption or slow-moving malware. It could also look across multiple user accounts that are accessing the whole file system. With Cloud Secure, what it's looking at is each user account to see, is someone doing something they haven't normally done? So we keep about 30 months within our database of the user activity of that storage to identify user accounts that might be doing something strange. You know, why is Sally in HR suddenly accessing engineering files, or why is Bob in marketing grabbing financial records that he normally doesn't access? And in that process, we'll then create a snapshot as a recovery point, but we can also automatically block the user from accessing the storage even further. And we don't go through Active Directory because there's a direct interaction with Cloud Secure and in the ONTAP system, we can stop the access immediately. And so that would prevent further data exfiltration as a possible remediation.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
So I want to go back to one of the points that Arthur mentioned and get a definitive answer from that around, you know, like, do you have the ability to say, hey, we noticed something happened, so we stopped it, but you may want to go back to this point in time. Is that where you said that you could take a snapshot and you could say, hey, go back to the snapshot because this is where we think it was clean? Is that what you meant by that?
Yeah, and I'll show you in the demo, but effectively, we don't have the technology today to go back to to identify a clean snapshot. We rely on some of our partners like ProLion and Cleandra's with CryptoSpike. Those are pursuits that we're developing.
Okay.
But what it will do is it'll notice the anomalous behavior and then take remediation immediately in order to prevent further damage.
Yeah.
So the recovery point is to minimize the amount of data that you need to recover.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Sure, thanks. We can also detect things like mass deletion of data as well. And then I mentioned the automated threat response. As it relates to recovery of data, because our snapshots are essentially just pointers to shared data, and because our data movement is the changed data blocks or the bits, we're moving a lot less data, and so our recovery times are a lot faster. But what also supports that is the understanding of what kind of data we have. So as I mentioned up front, the identification of data is critical because it not only identifies what data I want to protect, but it also helps us in a forensic analysis to know what data I want to recover. So as I mentioned before, right, downtime is the biggest cost associated with ransomware attacks. And so the faster we can get an organization back up and running, the better. And some people may say, well, gee, I don't want to get back up and running because we might have a problem with additional ransomware. Other people believe that, well, if I can get us up fast, then at least my business can operate, and then I can take rapid, clones of that data and then do the forensics to try to understand the source of that threat. So there's kind of competing philosophies on what's appropriate. Now, Chuck mentioned also ransom protection dashboard. And I just want to mention it here. We didn't have a chance to demo that fully. This is currently in beta, but essentially we're gathering data from all kinds of sources, right? So not only ONTAP, but we're using ActiveIQ, which is kind of our data intelligence database of all the users as they feed information back and call home. We aggregate that data. Also DataSense and Cloud Insights and Cloud Backup. And so we're gathering information to provide a single view of a security posture of an organization, and then be able to dive into each one of those widgets to better understand what's going on. Why does this folder have public permissions when it has sensitive data in it? And we'd be able to provide that information for users to be able to protect their data more effectively.
Can you tell us a little bit more about DataSense? Is this new? Did it used to have a different name? Has it been around for a while and I've just not heard that term?
Yeah, we acquired a company 2-3 years ago, Nago, and we initially released the product as Cloud Compliance. Yeah, so we found that more of the use cases that people were looking at with that product were more around governance and data stewardship. And so we moved the name to be more aligned with that use case. But within DataSense, it not only looks at the kind of data, but it also compares it against things like HIPAA requirements and others, and you can provide reports on whether you're compliant.
That's great. I think it's a much better name because it says data and it's sensible. So thank you.
Do you have some sort of, let's say, remediation actions as well out of the dashboard, or it's just showing you, that, for example, your files are encrypted here and you get problems there?
Yeah, initially it's more of a reporting mechanism. There's a vision for how we might engage with remediation activities, but we do have the ability from the automated standpoint of autonomously creating snapshots and blocking users through other tools like within ONTAP as well as Cloud Insights. I wanted to just show a quick demo of how Cloud Insights works, a cloud secure feature, and then also how the autonomous ransomware protection works. Let me set the stage here. So Cloud Insights, as I mentioned, is a SaaS-based service, and it can look across any storage infrastructure, cloud, on-prem. It's super, super powerful as a data monitoring and reporting platform. But we've built into it this ability to monitor user behavior analytics, and that's fed through a feature within ONTAP called F-Policy. So it can actually look at who's looking at what, who's touching it, what they did, and provides a lot of intelligence for us. So this first part of the demo is going to be how Cloud Secure looks at user behavior anomalies and then what it does to then protect against that. The second part of the demo is going to be this machine learning capability that's built into ONTAP, and you can see how that works. Most of what works actually is not visible, so what we'll be looking at is the UIs for each of these. So what you'll see here after we log in is there have been a number of ransomware attacks, and so we can click on any one of these ransomware attacks, and we'll see that this particular one happened about 12 hours ago. And the action that was taken was an automated snapshot. And now we can also see what, so 555 encrypted files. We can see that the extension was EZZ, was added to each file as part of that ransomware attack. We can see the user who was compromised with that ransomware attack and even their manager. So if we want to go back and talk with them, we can then say, hey, guess what? You got attacked. And then we can also see common paths that might be indicative of that ransomware propagating into other areas by this particular user. And so Cloud Secure provides us that information. Now, this next feature is the autonomous ransomware feature, which is built into ONTAP. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to enable this feature. So we put on learning mode now. So we'll look at Explorer, we're going to look at the volume, we're going to see the kind of data there. So there's PDFs, JPEGs, PNG files. And once we think that it's learned enough, we're going to put it in active mode. And so now it's in active mode, and we're going to simulate an attack here. And what we're going to do is we're going to encrypt the data and add an extension of LCKD to the file extension. Now, when we go and take a look at the suspected file types, we can see that this LCKD indeed was added and that the threat was identified. And what we did is we took an automatic snapshot once we identified that that threat was there. So if we go into Explorer, we can see that within the file directory, indeed, all these files have this LCKD extension. And it's not just looking for the extensions, it's actually looking at data entropy and trying to find out what changes are happening. That just happened to be the evidence of that. As I mentioned, we took a snapshot copy. So now we're going to restore everything from this snapshot copy. We click restore, and literally within minutes, we can restore terabytes of data. And so it's super, super fast, and we can get the data back up and running. And now as we look at the directory again, we can see that all the files have been restored to their former status.
So it gets restored. Does it also do something to that user saying that, yeah, we fixed the data, but something happened why the data was compromised. So you block the user as well and then find what went wrong that introduced the ransomware or encrypted the data? Because until you fix a problem, it's the same way that, you find a short circuit, you don't switch on the circuit breaker until you fix the problem.
Yeah.
Are you doing something like that?
So there isn't necessarily an automated forensics, but within Cloud Insights and Cloud Data Sense, we can go in and take a look at every file and every user to see what actually changed, when it changed, what they did to it. And so it helps us to understand that if we can map that back to when we detected the threat, we can then see the files that changed at that time. And then we can apply that the remediation actions beyond just the snapshot and the recovery.
Right. And another thing that I just wanted to ask was that, say, for example, Tally and HR, for example, got compromised and things started encrypting. But sometimes malware can actually start sending things out. Again, data exfiltration starts happening before. If encryption or data getting encrypted is the only thing that's detecting it, then you might already have the data sent out before the AI kicks in.
Yeah.
So is that the only logic, or are there other things as well that actually determine if the user is compromised?
Yeah, so there's a number of different factors by which we measure user behavior anomalies, right? One of them would be mass deletion. Another one could be reading and writing of data that might be indicative of reading lots of data, encrypting it. It might be accessing folders that they normally don't access. It could be mass reads, which might be indicative of someone reading it and putting it on a USB drive. So all those are possible reasons why we would create a snapshot and then block the user from further access.